The screen on my phone lit up just as the sun began to peek over the horizon. It was a text from my own son. "Hey Dad," it read, "plans have changed. You don't need to come on the cruise next week." Monica decided she just wants her family there. The very next day, I canceled every payment I had authorized, put the house they were living in on the market, and left town. By the time they returned from their ultra-luxury vacation, the home they thought was theirs had been completely stripped down to the bare wooden studs. Before I dive into exactly how I systematically dismantled their perfect little lives, tell me in the comments where you're watching this from. And if you've ever had to teach an incredibly entitled family member a harsh lesson in reality, hit that like button and subscribe. My name is Harrison Caldwell. I'm 70 years old, and for the past 40 years, I've run a no-nonsense construction contracting firm in Seattle. It was 6:00 a.m. on a Tuesday. Outside my window, the Seattle sky was that same grim, damp gray that tends to hang over the city for months at a time. I was sitting at my kitchen table, slowly sipping a black coffee. The house was silent. Ever since my wife, Diane, passed away 3 years ago, it has been painfully quiet. I just stared at the empty chair across from me, my mind filled with memories of her. That was when my phone, resting on the cold granite countertop, buzzed. It was a text from my 34-year-old son, Derek. I had broken my back on construction sites to raise him. I picked up the phone, expecting a simple question about our upcoming trip, maybe something about flight times or luggage tags. Instead, the glowing words on the screen hit me like a physical blow to the chest. "Hey Dad, plans have changed. You don't need to come on the cruise next week." Monica decided she just wants her family there. I just sat there in the dim kitchen light. I read the text over and over, trying to make the words mean something else. You don't need to come. Monica just wants her family there. A sharp tightness grew in my chest. Let me give you some background so you can fully understand what I was looking at. This wasn't some budget weekend at a local resort. This was a 10-day ultra-luxury Alaskan cruise. I had footed the entire $45,000 bill, putting the full amount directly on my personal platinum credit card. I hadn't asked my son or his wife for a single cent. I paid because I wanted to honor Diane. Alaska was the one place my wife always wanted to visit but never got to, because I was always working, always building, always pouring every ounce of my energy into creating a financial foundation for Derek. When she passed, I promised myself I would take our son on that trip to celebrate her birthday. I booked the owner's suite, the absolute best, most opulent room on the entire ship. A sprawling suite with panoramic ocean views, a private balcony, and dedicated butler service. I had even prepaid for a helicopter tour over the glaciers. I booked it for all of us. Me, Derek, and his 31-year-old wife, Monica. I wanted us to be together. I wanted to share this meaningful memory with the only family I had left in this world. And now, my son had sent a cowardly text at 6:00 a.m., casually rescinding an invitation to a gift I had spent $45,000 to provide, simply because his wife wanted her family to take my place. A cold, heavy silence filled my kitchen. I set my coffee cup down. My hands were perfectly steady. When you have spent 4 decades managing massive construction sites, dealing with corrupt suppliers and lazy foremen, you learn a lesson very quickly. Anger is a completely useless emotion. You don't throw a tantrum. You solve the problem. I tapped Derek's name on the screen and hit the call button. I held the phone to my ear, listening to the ringing. 1 ring, 2 rings, and then the line went dead. He had rejected my call. My own son, the boy I once carried on my shoulders, the man for whom I had paid for an expensive university degree in full, was too cowardly to even speak to me. Derek had always been spineless. He willingly traded his mother's firm, but loving guidance for the manipulative, absolute control Monica exerted over his life. I took a long, steady breath, forcing myself to calm down, and dialed the number a second time. This time, someone picked up, but it was Derek. "Hello, Harrison," it was Monica. Her voice was low, tightly controlled, and dripping with that false, elegant politeness she always used when she was about to say something truly vicious. She didn't call me Dad. She rarely did. I kept my tone completely level, hiding the storm that was brewing inside. "Put my son on the phone, Monica." She let out an affected sigh, clearly annoyed by my persistence. "Derek is in the shower right now, Harrison," she said smoothly. "Honestly, there really isn't anything to discuss. He already sent you the text. The plans have changed." I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the grim sky. "Monica," I said slowly, weighing every word with precision, "that is a $45,000 trip. I booked the owner's suite to honor Diane. You don't just change the plans and kick out the person who paid for the entire thing." I could hear her shifting on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of running water in the background, proving Derek was hiding in there. Then, she said the words that shattered the last remaining fragile illusion of our family. "Look, Harrison," she whispered, her tone becoming patronizing. "My parents have never enjoyed a luxury vacation in their lives. They truly deserve this experience, and my brother Bradley is coming too. Let's be honest. Someone your age gets sick easily at sea. It's a huge burden. You'd be tired the whole time and just complain. My parents are in much better shape so they can actually enjoy the owner's suite." I closed my eyes. The audacity of this woman was breathtaking. She was hijacking my generous gift, my hard-earned money, and my deeply personal tribute to my late wife, turning it into an all-expenses-paid luxury vacation for her own parents and her deadbeat brother. These were people who had never contributed a single cent to her life, let alone ours. I remained completely silent on my end of the line. I let her disrespectful words echo in the empty air. Monica took my thoughtful silence for her victory. She thought she had won. She thought she was dealing with a tired, lonely, confused old man who would just swallow this massive insult because of an overwhelming need for family connection. "We'll make sure to buy you some nice souvenirs from the ports along the way, Harrison," she added, her voice dripping with artificial pity. "Just stay home, relax, enjoy the quiet time by yourself. We'll see you when we get back." Without waiting for me to say a word, she hung up. The line went dead, leaving me alone in the dark kitchen. I slowly pulled the phone from my ear and set it on the cold granite island. For a long minute, I just stood there, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. Monica's voice still echoed loudly in my mind. "Someone your age gets sick easily at sea. You'd be tired the whole time and just complain." In a different life, maybe with a different man, he might have screamed in rage. Maybe he would have smashed his coffee mug against the wall, called his son back repeatedly, and begged for an explanation. I did none of that. When you have run a commercial construction company in Seattle for 40 years, you learn to handle betrayal differently. You don't survive 4 decades of dealing with corrupt suppliers, shoddy subcontractors, and brutal contract negotiations by throwing helpless tantrums. In my line of work, when the foundation cracks or a massive steel beam bends under pressure, you don't cry. You pull out the blueprints, check the structural integrity, and systematically identify exactly where the rot is. Then, you dismantle it with unforgiving precision. I walked out of the kitchen calmly, leaving my untouched coffee on the counter, and moved down the hallway toward my private study. The wooden floorboards creaked softly beneath my feet, a sound all too familiar in a house that suddenly felt far too empty and chillingly cold. I sat at my heavy mahogany desk, opened my laptop, and waited patiently for the screen to cast its pale blue light into the quiet room. I needed to see the extent of the damage for myself. I opened my private email and quickly found the original booking confirmation from Royal Caribbean. It was a massive receipt, $45,000 charged directly to my personal platinum credit card without hesitation. I remembered the day I booked it. I was sitting in this very chair. I looked at the framed photo of Diane on my desk, her smiling face from a coastal trip we took years ago, and I felt a profound sense of purpose. I was purchasing a beautiful, lasting memory for us, a grand tribute to the great woman who had held our entire family together. I had carefully chosen the owner's suite, the crown jewel of the ship, because I genuinely wanted Derek to experience the kind of luxury I had spent my entire life trying to provide. I highlighted the long booking reference number, copied it to my clipboard, and navigated to the official cruise line passenger portal. My hands didn't tremble at all as I steadily pasted the code into the secure login bar. I hit enter. The loading icon spun for a few agonizing seconds, and finally, the detailed booking page loaded onto the monitor. I stared at the bright screen, expressionless. I blinked, leaning forward, my eyes quickly scanning the passenger list. I scrolled down to the primary guest details section, fully expecting to see my name, Harrison Caldwell, listed prominently as the primary account holder and lead passenger. My name was gone. It hadn't been moved to a secondary cabin. It hadn't been downgraded to a standard stateroom. It had been surgically scrubbed from the entire digital system. In the space that should have belonged to me, the primary spot in the massive owner's suite was the name Richard Sterling. Right below him was Margaret Sterling, Monica's parents. These were the same people who, for the last 5 years, had mocked my blue-collar background, acted with arrogance, and constantly judged my calloused hands at every Thanksgiving dinner. And now they were the primary occupants of the $45,000 luxury suite I had paid for in full. My chest tightened, and a cold knot of realization formed deep in my gut, but I forced myself to keep scrolling. 2 more passengers were attached to this active booking, Derek Caldwell and Monica Sterling. That made 4 people in total. The owner's suite was perfectly designed to comfortably house 6. I looked closely at the final passenger slot, the one that should have undeniably been mine. Instead, I saw the name Bradley Sterling. Bradley, Monica's 32-year-old brother, an incredibly lazy man who had dropped out of 2 different local colleges and been legally terminated from 3 different entry-level jobs I had personally guaranteed him for, was currently living rent-free in his parents' basement playing video games all day. This fully grown man, who had never once so much as bought me a cheap cup of coffee, was now officially registered to enjoy the private balcony, butler service, and premium dining packages, all paid for by my blood, sweat, and decades of hard labor. They didn't just cancel my invitation. If it had been just that, it would have been cruel enough, but this was something else entirely. They had actively logged into my private, secure account, intentionally hijacked my paid booking, and selfishly replaced me with the Sterlings. They had completely stolen my deeply personal gift, using it as a private, all-expenses-paid luxury vacation for greedy people who meant nothing to me. I leaned back into my leather chair, letting the sheer, terrifying impact of this betrayal wash over my tired bones. Monica had orchestrated this entire scheme. I knew her ruthless methods all too well. She was a silent, incredibly toxic master of control, always wrapping her selfish demands in the guise of necessary care or deep emotional resonance. She had likely convinced Derek that I was too old, too fragile, or that I would be a burden on a fun party trip. She probably spun an elaborate and persuasive lie that taking her family was somehow a favor to me, gracefully sparing me the extreme physical fatigue of a long ocean voyage. And Derek, my spineless, cowardly son, was eager to let her do it. He willingly allowed his manipulative wife to log into the booking portal, manually delete his grieving father's name, and hand over a massive amount of money to her terrible, patronizing parents. He stood by in silence, letting them completely and coldly hijack a sacred trip clearly intended to honor the memory of his own mother. The betrayal was so profound, so calculated and vicious, that it instantly and permanently stripped away any lingering shred of paternal weakness I might have foolishly held onto. I looked at the booking details again with intense focus. The massive cruise ship was officially scheduled to set sail in exactly 7 days, next Tuesday. Official boarding passes had been automatically generated and saved. Special luggage tags had been physically printed. Expensive premium drink packages had been manually selected. I could see clearly on the screen that Bradley had happily gone in and successfully upgraded his personal beverage package to the absolute highest level, granting him the privilege of unlimited expensive top-shelf spirits every single day. All these excessive, arrogant expenses were linked directly and continuously to my personal platinum credit card, which was still tucked deep within the cruise system as the primary default payment method for all upcoming onboard charges. They actually thought they had finally won. They were truly convinced they had successfully and completely outmaneuvered me. Monica had looked at me with arrogance and quickly, foolishly concluded that I was just a tired, broken old man who would quietly and obediently swallow this huge, terrible disrespect. She assumed I would stay home, sadly accept her incredibly fake pity, simply because I was too desperate for my son's affection to cause a scene. She arrogantly assumed my heavy silence on the phone earlier was the sad, submissive silence of a completely defeated man. She didn't have the slightest clue who she was dealing with. She didn't grasp the logic of a man who had spent 40 years surviving the cutthroat world of commercial contracting, only to rise and dominate that industry. You don't build massive, multi-million-dollar skyscrapers by carelessly letting greedy, treacherous people steal your expensive raw materials. And you don't accumulate a significant personal fortune by foolishly allowing lazy, entitled parasites to silently drain your private bank accounts without ensuring there are severe, devastating consequences. I stared intensely at the glowing screen, my cursor quietly tracing the names of the entire Sterling family. A slow, chilling sense of clarity washed over my mind. That profound sense of grief had vanished, evaporating into the cold morning air. In its place was a sharp, focused, tactical and purely destructive energy. I reached for the yellow legal pad that always sat perfectly centered on my mahogany desk and clicked my heavy metal pen. I began to write down a detailed, precise checklist. I didn't cancel those expensive cruise tickets right then. That move was too simple, far too easy. That specific choice would have been nothing more than a minor, temporary inconvenience they would eventually find a way around. I desperately, completely wanted them to happily pack their expensive designer bags. I wanted them to joyfully drive together to that busy, crowded port. I absolutely wanted them to successfully board that massive luxury ship, feel that fresh, cold ocean breeze, and deeply experience the arrogant thrill of their stolen victory. I wanted them safely and completely trapped on that massive metal ship. With a quiet, perfectly decisive, and immensely satisfying click, I closed my silver laptop. The foundation of our entire family hadn't just developed minor cracks under pressure. It was rotting from the core. And now, it was the perfect time to bring the whole structure down. My smartphone buzzed on the hard granite island in the kitchen, shattering the heavy morning silence. I looked down at the bright screen. Derek's name was displayed in bold, black letters. 22 minutes had passed since Monica had rudely hung up on me. In those 22 minutes of absolute silence, my son had probably been gathering the sliver of courage he needed to face his father. I let the phone buzz 3 times. I wanted him to sweat. I wanted him to sit in the intense, uncomfortable tension of his own cowardice before I granted him the favor of answering. On the fourth ring, I reached out and slowly slid the green icon to accept the call. I held the device to my ear, just breathing, waiting for him to speak first. I didn't offer a warm greeting. I just let the hollow, dead air weigh heavily on his guilty conscience. "Dad, are you there?" Derek's voice came through the small speaker. It was shaking, faint, and strained tight with nervous anxiety. "Yes, Derek, I'm here," I replied. My voice was completely flat, devoid of any parental warmth. It was the exact tone I used to use when dealing with dishonest concrete suppliers who thought they could cut corners on a major commercial build. I heard my son swallow hard on the other end. "Look, Dad," he immediately began reciting his rehearsed script. "I'm really sorry everything happened so suddenly. Monica didn't mean to sound so harsh on the phone earlier. It's just that we're dealing with an incredibly sensitive, complex medical situation right now." I remained completely silent, forcing him to desperately fill the uncomfortable void. "For the past few months, Monica has been struggling with severe clinical depression," Derek continued, his voice dropping to a low, dramatic whisper. "Her therapist strongly suggested that she needs a completely stress-free, supportive emotional environment to recover properly. The medical professionals specifically advised that she only spend high-quality, undisturbed recovery time with her immediate family. Her parents and her brother know exactly how to manage her fragile emotional triggers." I listened to this pathetic, meticulously constructed lie pour out of my 34-year-old son. The level of sophisticated manipulation was staggering. They were actively weaponizing the concept of mental health to casually justify stealing a $45,000 luxury vacation. I knew for a fact that Monica didn't have severe clinical depression. Just 3 days ago, I had seen her with a loud group of friends at an expensive restaurant in downtown Seattle, drinking top-shelf cocktails and laughing so hard she could barely stand. This entire therapy narrative was a convenient, perfectly timed excuse designed to paint me as the villain if I dared to push back against their blatant theft. "It's just for her mental health, Dad," Derek pleaded, his voice increasingly desperate for my blind validation. "You know how important family support is during a major mental crisis. We didn't want to burden you with her heavy emotional baggage during what was supposed to be a fun, relaxing trip. Trying to accommodate her strict diet and her therapy schedule would have just stressed you out. Honestly, it's better for everyone if you just stay home and get some quiet rest. We fully intend to pay you back for your specific ticket. Once our personal finances stabilize a bit, we'll set up a monthly repayment plan to return the money. Please, Dad, try to understand our incredibly difficult situation. Please don't ruin our important recovery trip by getting unnecessarily angry." I closed my eyes, feeling a heavy, intense wave of disappointment wash over me. I remembered my late wife, Diane. She had been an incredibly strong, resilient woman who believed firmly in the concept of personal accountability. When Derek was a teenager, if he ever tried to avoid taking responsibility for his mistakes, Diane would confidently march him back to the scene of the error and force him to look the victim in the eye while he offered a sincere apology. She raised him with tough love, trying to mold him into a solid, reliable man. But the devastating truth was that Derek had always been weak at his core. He lacked any structural integrity. The moment he left our strict home and met Monica, he eagerly and completely surrendered his backbone. He traded his strong, demanding mother for a manipulative, controlling wife who skillfully dictated his every move. I knew with absolute, terrifying certainty that Derek was standing in a quiet corner of his huge house, reading directly from the mental script Monica had force-fed him minutes earlier. He was nothing more than a frightened puppet, dutifully reciting his master's lines. He actually believed that throwing out a vague, hollow promise of future repayment would magically settle my growing rage. He genuinely thought that proposing a fictional, long-term reimbursement plan for a $45,000 credit card bill would successfully blind me to the reality of their vicious betrayal. I knew very well that I would never see a single cent from them. They were living far beyond their means, drowning in debt just to maintain a curated, fake image of immense wealth on their social media profiles. Expecting them to suddenly develop the strict financial discipline to slowly pay back tens of thousands of dollars was an absolute joke. But I didn't point out the logical holes in his pathetic story. I didn't demand to see the therapist's official medical notes. I didn't scream about the public disrespect of replacing my name with Bradley's on a trip meant to honor my late wife. Instead, I smoothly played along with the lie. I deliberately drained all the anger, betrayal, and sorrow from my voice. I took a slow, deep breath, perfectly mimicking the tone of a sympathetic, defeated, older father who only wanted his son to be happy. "I understand, son," I said softly. My voice was smooth, quiet, and completely non-threatening. "If Monica is really struggling with such a serious, complex medical issue, then she absolutely needs to be surrounded by her own parents. Mental health is incredibly important. I completely understand why you had to change the passenger information so suddenly. You don't need to worry about me. I'll be perfectly fine staying here at home. You just focus entirely on taking care of your wife and ensuring she gets the quiet recovery environment she needs." There was a sharp, sudden intake of breath on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the massive, heavy weight of anxiety instantly lifting from Derek's shoulders. The relief in his voice was obvious and almost sickeningly sweet. "Really, Dad?" he asked, his tone shifting instantly from desperate panic to bubbling, arrogant excitement. "You're not extremely mad at us?" "I mean, I know it was a huge, sudden change of plans, and I was really worried you would be furious at me over the financial side of the tickets." "I'm not angry at all, Derek," I lied effortlessly. My face was a cold, expressionless mask of stone. A father's only job is to properly support his son during difficult times. You go on the vacation, enjoy the fresh ocean air, and have a wonderful, relaxing time with the Sterlings. When you get back to Seattle, we can easily discuss all the boring financial details and repayment plans. There is absolutely no rush." "Thank you, Dad," Derek gushed, falling completely into the trap I had perfectly laid for him. "You're honestly the best. Seriously, this means the world to Monica and me. We will definitely bring you back something incredibly nice from the glaciers. I have to go help Monica finish packing her special therapy items, but I'll text you before we board next week. I love you, Dad." "I love you too, son," I replied calmly. "I hope you have a safe and truly unforgettable journey." I pulled the phone from my ear and deliberately ended the call. The screen went completely black, reflecting my own cold, unsmiling face in the glass. Derek had eagerly bought my entire performance. He genuinely believed his clueless, overly generous old father had swallowed their pathetic fairy tale, without a moment of critical suspicion. He was probably walking back to his master bedroom right now, flashing a victorious smile at his manipulative wife, confidently assuring her that the stupid old man had been handled and safely cleared from their path. They thought they had securely won the ultimate prize. They confidently believed they were about to embark on the most incredible, free vanity vacation of their lives. But they were dead wrong. The real war hadn't even officially begun, and my arrogant son had no idea he had just carelessly handed me the precise tactical ammunition I needed to completely, systematically destroy his meticulously curated fake life. I sat in the absolute silence of my study, slowly interlacing my fingers, fully prepared to initiate the next devastating phase of my counteroffensive. The heavy mahogany clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking the slow passage of time. Suddenly, the quiet atmosphere was broken by a sharp, buzzing vibration from the smartphone on my desk. The screen lit up the dim room with a harsh white light. I leaned forward to pick up the device, expecting another text from Derek, perhaps a hollow apology or another carefully crafted lie to ensure I remained pacified. Instead, the notification banner showed the bright blue logo of my primary banking institution. It was an automated security alert. I frowned, feeling a flicker of confusion. I swiped to unlock the phone and opened the secure banking app. The alert was tied directly to a specific checking account, one I rarely monitored because it was intended to remain completely dormant. It was a joint emergency checking account I officially shared with Derek. This account was a sentimental relic from a completely different era of our lives. Many years ago, when Derek first moved out of our family home for university, my late wife, Diane, insisted we set up a shared financial safety net for him. Diane was an incredibly loving mother, but she was also pragmatic and fiercely protective. She wanted to ensure that if our only son ever fell into a true crisis, a sudden medical emergency, a major car breakdown, or a catastrophic living situation, he would have immediate, no questions asked access to liquidity without having to wait for bank hours or international wire transfers. I initially fought the idea, convinced a young man needed to learn to manage his own financial struggles to build character. But Diane looked at me with those sharp, uncompromising eyes and quietly insisted we provide our child with a silent, permanent financial safety net. I dutifully deposited a generous sum into that account and practically forgot it existed. Over the decades, even after Derek graduated, landed a high-paying job and married Monica, I never bothered to close the account or remove his name. I kept a substantial balance there, quietly fulfilling the promise I made to Diane to always provide a safe harbor for our son. For years, the balance remained untouched. Derek knew the strict rules. That money was for absolute, life-altering emergencies only. I slowly clicked the notification, loading the transaction history for that joint emergency account. The numbers refreshed, and my eyes locked onto the black figures at the top of the ledger. My heart skipped a heavy beat. The total available balance had been drastically and completely reduced. I scrolled frantically to the recent activity, my eyes focusing on the latest line items. There, with cold digital clarity, were 3 consecutive cash withdrawals. Each individual withdrawal was for the exact same precise amount, $9,900. I stared at the screen, letting the cold reality of the math wash over my mind. 3 consecutive $9,900 transactions, perfectly executed within minutes, efficiently siphoned $29,700 of raw, untraceable cash directly from my personal emergency reserve. The blood in my veins turned to ice. As a man who has spent 40 years managing complex construction budgets, handling large union payrolls, and navigating strict corporate banking regulations, I knew exactly what that specific number meant. You do not withdraw $9,900 from a bank purely by coincidence. In the U.S. financial system, any cash transaction of $10,000 or more automatically triggers a mandatory currency transaction report, CTR, filed with the federal government. It is a strictly enforced legal requirement designed to monitor and prevent illicit financial activity and money laundering. By deliberately keeping each withdrawal exactly $100 below that reporting threshold, whoever took that money was actively engaging in structuring a calculated, illegal form of financial manipulation. They were intentionally and maliciously bypassing federal monitoring systems. They were desperate to pull a massive sum of liquid cash out of the banking system without generating a single official red flag or triggering an automatic security call to the primary account holder. They weren't just stealing my luxury Alaskan vacation. They were actively, systematically draining my liquid assets while feeding me a pathetic, fictional sob story about Monica's supposed clinical depression. The sheer audacity of this multi-layered criminal deception was sickening. Derek had spent 10 minutes on the phone practically begging for my deepest parental sympathy, emotionally painting his wife as a fragile woman in need of a quiet retreat, all while they were orchestrating an illegal, calculated withdrawal of nearly $30,000 in untraceable cash. I set the phone down on the mahogany desk. My breathing remained steady, but my mind was racing at a terrifying speed. Why would a married couple living in an expensive Bellevue mansion, driving luxury cars, need $30,000 in raw, physical cash? You don't use untraceable $100 bills to pay for normal, legal household expenses like utilities, groceries, or car insurance. You also don't need structured physical currency to enjoy an already paid-for luxury cruise, where every amenity is tied to a digital cabin key. Untraceable cash is collected and used for one specific purpose: to secretly pay for highly illegal items or shadowy, off-the-book services that legally cannot leave a permanent paper trail. My son was not just a weak, pathetic coward allowing his wife to disrespect his grieving father. He was now an active, brazen participant in a major financial conspiracy against my personal wealth. The pieces of this dark puzzle finally clicked together with devastating clarity. The sudden cruise cancellation, the inclusion of Monica's problematic family, the manipulative phone call, and now the massive, illegal structured cash withdrawal from an account they assumed I was too old or inattentive to monitor. They had crossed the line of no return. I had to know why. I closed the banking app and pushed my leather chair away from the desk. The quiet morning air in my study felt heavy, filled with the undeniable, cruel reality of my son's deception. A $30,000 structured withdrawal wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a calculated move by someone desperate for untraceable funds. I needed to see Derek face to face. I needed to look him in the eyes and see the truth for myself. I grabbed my heavy wool coat from the hall closet, walked out the front door, and into the cold, gray Seattle morning. I climbed into my truck and started the engine. The 30-minute drive across the floating bridge to the upscale suburbs of Bellevue felt like a century. The rhythmic thumping of my tires over the concrete expansion joints matched the furious beating of my heart. As I drove through the winding, tree-lined streets of Bellevue, modest homes gave way to sprawling, multi-million-dollar estates. This neighborhood was an exclusive enclave of manicured lawns, flawless driveways, and towering evergreens. It was designed for comfort and absolute security. I pulled toward the cul-de-sac where Derek and Monica lived. I didn't drive directly into their driveway. My instincts, honed by years of dealing with fraudulent contractors and hostile negotiations, warned me to remain hidden. I drove past their property, parked my truck 2 blocks away, and killed the engine. I sat in the quiet cabin, staring at my calloused hands on the steering wheel. I got out and began the walk on the pristine sidewalk. The biting air stung my face, but I barely felt it. My mind was focused on the massive structure at the end of the street, a stunning modern masterpiece valued at $2.2 million. I knew the exact assessed value because I was the one who bought the property. When Derek and Monica first married, they complained endlessly about the cost of living and their inability to afford a decent home in a safe neighborhood. I wanted to give my only son the ultimate head start, the foundation I had to struggle to build for myself. I bought the Bellevue estate with cash. I didn't want them crushed by 30-year mortgages or volatile interest rates. However, my seasoned business mind eventually won out over pure parental sentiment. I legally placed the entire property into a strict revocable living trust. I retained ultimate control of the deed, but I allowed them to live there rent-free. I even paid the property taxes and the hefty HOA fees. I provided them with a flawless, luxury existence, completely free of housing costs. All they had to do was maintain the property and build their lives. And now, they were using the absolute financial freedom I provided to systematically steal from me. As I approached their manicured property, I hugged the tall privacy hedges, avoiding the view of their front door smart cameras. The audacity of their deception tasted like bitter ash. I slipped past the side gate, my boots making almost no sound on the wet pavers. I bypassed the main entrance and headed for the hidden side door that led directly into the three-car garage. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my heavy brass key ring, and selected the silver master key, a spare I had kept for major maintenance emergencies. I inserted the key into the deadbolt and turned the lock. The well-oiled mechanism clicked open, barely audible. I pushed the heavy fire door open and stepped into the garage. I stood in the center of the cold concrete for a few seconds, letting my eyes adjust to the dim, artificial light. This massive garage was a flawless monument to their unearned, extravagant lifestyle. Monica's new white luxury SUV and Derek's expensive import sports car gleamed under the overhead lights. Both vehicles were purchased with funds I provided as an early inheritance. I remembered writing those massive checks, wrongly believing I was helping them build a stable life. Now, those cars looked like trophies of theft. The air smelled of expensive leather polish and premium motor oil. I closed the side door behind me. The house above was not empty. Even through the thick, soundproofed garage ceiling, I could clearly hear distinct activity. Footsteps pacing quickly on hardwood, the sharp thud of heavy objects being set down, and voices. Their words drifted down through the ventilation ducts. I walked slowly toward the utility stairs, a narrow passage that led directly to the back hallway near the spacious master suite. I placed my hand on the wooden railing and began to climb. I carefully placed my boots on the very edge of each tread, shifting my body weight to avoid a single squeak. I reached the residential floor, disappearing into the dark shadows of the back hallway. The voices from the master bedroom became crystal clear. They weren't in a panicked, depressive rush to pack. They were celebrating. I heard Monica let out a sharp, genuine burst of laughter, a joyful sound completely at odds with her fabricated story of severe clinical depression. I stood like a statue in the protective darkness of the hallway, my back pressed against the cold plaster wall. Through the master suite's door, left slightly ajar, I could see bright morning light spilling onto imported Italian carpet. I could hear the rhythmic sound of stuffed suitcases being zipped shut. They were dragging massive hardshell designer luggage across the floor, casually discussing which expensive formal wear to bring for the exclusive captain's dinner on the cruise. A deep, cold rage burned in my chest. There was no medical emergency. There was no need for a quiet, healing retreat. They were simply packing for a luxurious, expensive vacation they had cold-bloodedly stolen from my grieving hands. I held my breath, narrowing my focus, listening in silence as the true, terrifying abyss of their sinister betrayal finally unfolded before me. The master bedroom door was ajar, letting a sliver of sunlight cut across the hardwood floor. I could clearly hear the sound of heavy luggage zippers being pulled shut. Then Monica's voice emerged. It wasn't the hushed, worried whisper she had used on me hours earlier. It was loud, crisp, and soaked in an ugly, arrogant sense of triumph. She was actively mocking me. I could hear the derision as she mimicked my calm acceptance of her demands. She laughed sharply, telling someone in the room how incredibly easy it had been to get that stupid old man to give up the luxury vacation. She bragged that she barely had to push before I surrendered, handing her exactly what she wanted. My jaw tightened. She was proudly describing my profound grief as a major weakness, one she exploited without mercy for personal gain. Another voice joined the conversation, drawing a harsh, greedy laugh from Monica. It was Bradley, Monica's perpetually unemployed brother, a man whose entire existence seemed strictly devoted to avoiding honest labor. He was lounging somewhere in the room, likely sitting on a bed my money had purchased. He eagerly asked if they had printed all the boarding passes. Then he loudly declared that his primary goal for the 10-day Alaska trip was to systematically drink the ship's most expensive liquor. He gleefully reminded Monica to double-check that the onboard spending account was still firmly linked to my platinum credit card. He vividly described the premium bourbon and exclusive champagne he planned to order every night, joking that he would drink enough to send me to a shallow, financially ruined grave. He used those exact words. He was actively salivating at the thought of draining my personal finances on the cruise ship I had booked to honor my late wife's sacred memory. The level of disrespect echoing in that room felt like a physical weight on my chest. As I listened to Bradley's gleeful anticipation of his stolen luxury, my thoughts drifted back to my own life's work. I thought of the biting, freezing rain of late 1970s Seattle. I remembered waking up at 4:00 a.m., my entire body aching from the previous day's labor. I remembered lacing up my worn leather work boots in the dark, slipping out of the house to avoid waking a sleeping Diane or a young, innocent Derek. I spent 40 years standing in knee-deep mud, desperately pouring heavy concrete foundations, hauling massive steel beams, until the physical cartilage in my lower spine was ground to powder. I permanently ruined my own back, sacrificing my own physical health for one unwavering purpose. I wanted to ensure my only son never had to struggle like I did. I wanted to build a massive, impregnable financial fortress so Derek could live a good life, safe from the overwhelming anxiety of poverty. Diane and I sacrificed every personal pleasure just to give the world to that boy. And there he was, my son, the ultimate product of all those hard sacrifices. He stood in absolute silence in that bedroom while his manipulative wife and her parasite brother openly mocked the man who had given him everything. He was a coward, a shadow of a man lacking the basic moral courage to defend his own father. But the truly devastating part, the moment that shifted this situation from mere extreme greed to something sinister and dark, was about to happen. The sound of the suitcase zippers stopped. The room went quiet for a few seconds. Then Derek finally spoke. His voice was completely devoid of joy. It was tight, nervous, and laced with a deep, cowardly hesitation. He didn't tell them to stop mocking me. Instead, he asked a question that made the blood in my veins freeze solid. "Are you absolutely sure about the legal documents, Monica?" Derek asked. His tone was a pathetic, fearful whisper, but it carried clearly into the dark hallway where I stood. I could hear his feet shifting nervously on the floor. "I mean, doing this while we're hundreds of miles away on the ocean. It feels like a massive risk. We're talking about fundamentally changing his entire life. He hasn't really lost his memory. Monica, we both know he just misses Mom. He's just heartbroken." The absolute weight of those specific words hit me like a runaway freight train. Legal documents. Lost his memory. My breathing stopped completely. I stood frozen in the icy shadows, my hands slowly clenching into hard, rigid fists at my sides. Derek knew I was perfectly fine. He actively admitted my mind was still sharp, and my only true torment was the grief of losing his mother. Yet, he was questioning a legal strategy built on a completely fabricated medical premise. Monica didn't offer him comfort or moral reassurance. She immediately barked at him in a vicious, sharp, commanding tone that made me instinctively recoil. She demanded to know if he was stupid enough to wait until I inevitably decided to change my estate planning. She aggressively reminded him that I had the legal power to change the terms of the family trust at any moment. She coldly asked if he wanted to risk watching me leave all the family wealth to a random charitable foundation out of pure spite. Then she announced that her parents' private physician had formally signed the preliminary evaluation documents. She proudly claimed that this highly corrupt, bribed medical professional had put it in writing that I was currently exhibiting signs of severe, undeniable cognitive decline and early onset Alzheimer's. The scale and the terrifying nature of their conspired plot shattered the final remnants of any illusions I held about fatherly love. Those three $9,900 cash withdrawals from our joint emergency account weren't simple impulse buys or hidden credit card debts. That cash was being used to bribe a corrupt medical professional. They weren't just stealing a vacation. They were constructing a complex, illegal medical trap designed to strip me of my rights, seize my financial assets, and have me institutionalized against my will. I stood frozen in the dark hallway, my heart beating a slow, heavy rhythm of absolute unforgiveness. I realized with terrifying clarity that my own flesh and blood had officially signed an irreversible legal document for his own gain, initiating my total financial destruction. The suffocating silence was shattered by Monica's vicious voice. She didn't soothe my son's flicker of conscience, she attacked it. "You really think you want to sit around and wait until your senile father decides to change his mind?" she hissed, her tone slicing through the air like a cold razor. "You want to sit here patiently until he rewrites his will and leaves every cent of his inheritance to some random charity out of pure spite? We've already paid for the legal foundation, Derek. My parents' private doctor has formally signed the preliminary medical evaluation. The documents clearly state that Harrison is actively showing signs of advanced, undeniable Alzheimer's." I stopped breathing. The floor beneath my boots felt like it was caving in. Alzheimer's. The weight of that specific word hung heavily in the air of the house I had bought with my own blood and sweat. It was the most insidious, cruel lie imaginable. My mind was razor sharp. I was still managing my own complex investment portfolio and could vividly recall the exact date I poured the foundation for the first commercial building of my career. Yet, my own daughter-in-law was discussing a forged medical diagnosis as casually as if she were planning a grocery trip. Suddenly, a blinding light of realization hit me. The bank alert from earlier that morning. 3 consecutive $9,900 cash withdrawals from our joint emergency account. I had initially suspected they were using the structured, untraceable cash to buy luxuries or pay off debt. The dark truth was thousands of times worse. That $30,000 was used to bribe a corrupt medical professional. They had brazenly used my own financial assets to purchase a completely fraudulent assessment from a doctor embedded in the Sterling family network. The remaining cash had undoubtedly gone to an unscrupulous attorney, secretly retained to draft those sinister legal documents without raising red flags. They had successfully used the money I saved to protect my son from real hardship, to fund a legal and medical execution against me. Derek stammered, his voice shaking with a pathetic, sickening cowardice. "But what if the probate judge wants to question him?" "Monica, what if the court requires a second opinion from an entirely independent neurologist? He'll fight back. You know my dad. When he's backed into a corner, he never just surrenders." Monica let out an arrogant, mocking scoff that echoed down the narrow hallway. "He won't have a chance to fight back, Derek," she replied smoothly, her voice dripping with dark, vicious confidence. "That is exactly why we're leaving on the cruise tomorrow morning. When we're safely floating in the middle of the ocean, completely unreachable and miles from the scene, our lawyer will formally file the emergency guardianship application with the county court. The judge will clearly see the medical affidavit signed by a licensed physician." I leaned my heavy shoulders against the cold plaster wall, closing my eyes and listening, as she outlined the final, devastating phase of her grand, illegal plan. And when the court inevitably asks for evidence of a pattern of recent erratic behavior, Monica continued, her tone vibrating with smug triumph, we will simply point to the undeniable fact that he deliberately abandoned his own expensive family vacation at the last possible moment. We will argue quite convincingly that his mental state has deteriorated to the point where he is a danger to himself, suddenly isolating himself from his loving family and refusing to leave his empty house. It's a perfect narrative. By the time our luxury cruise docks back in Seattle next week, the emergency court order will be processed. We will have a medical transport team waiting at his front door. He will be safely moved into a secure memory care facility for his own good, and we will immediately gain full legal control over the entire revocable living trust, this $2.2 million house, the massive investment portfolio, all his liquid cash accounts. Everything will finally, officially be ours. The precision of their sinister trap was breathtaking. They were actively using my profound grief over Diane's death to paint me as an unstable, reclusive eccentric. They had skillfully manipulated me into voluntarily skipping this cruise, effectively turning my quiet, dignified retreat into the final piece of evidence needed to legally steal my basic human rights. If I had stayed home, oblivious to their dark conversation, I would have woken up next week to a nightmare. Medical staff forcibly removing me from my home, locking me away for the rest of my life. They were willing to legally bury me alive just to accelerate their inheritance. The pain in my chest vanished. The heavy, suffocating grief that had weighed on my tired heart since 6:00 a.m. evaporated into the thin air. There was not a trace of fatherly love left in my body. The man standing in that master bedroom was no longer my son. He was a dangerous, heavily corrupted liability. He was an active, willing participant in a sophisticated, vicious conspiracy designed to strip me of my freedom, my dignity, and the legacy I had earned through hard work. I didn't need to hear another word. I pushed silently away from the hallway wall, ensuring my heavy winter coat didn't brush against the doorframe. With surgical precision, I placed my boots on the exact edge of the wooden steps, silently retracing my path to the dim garage. My breathing was incredibly slow, deep, and completely controlled. I felt a massive, cold, highly focused energy flooding my veins. It was the same sensation I felt when walking onto a chaotic, severely delayed construction site, knowing I had to ruthlessly fire the management team and rebuild the crumbling structure from the bare ground up. I slipped silently out the side garage door, feeling the cold morning wind hit my face. I walked the 2 long blocks back to my truck, my pace wide and filled with purpose. I climbed into the driver's seat and gripped the heavy leather steering wheel. The moments of silent, soul-crushing grief were over. They had officially declared war, and I was going to bring a slaughter so financially and legally devastating that the precious Sterling family name would be permanently destroyed. The drive back across the I-90 floating bridge was a blur of gray concrete and heavy rain. The rhythmic thumping of the truck's thick tires on the wet pavement matched the cold, mechanical processing in my brain. I didn't drive back to my empty, quiet house. I drove straight into the dense, towering heart of downtown Seattle. As I navigated the slippery, crowded streets, the high-rise glass and steel skyscrapers stood like massive, heartless sentinels overhead. I parked the truck in the underground lot of a modern high-rise office building, killed the engine, and took one final deep breath. The raw, visceral sting of the betrayal had faded, replaced by a profound, chilling clarity. I was no longer a grieving widower, and I was no longer an indulgent father. I was a man fighting for his basic survival. I stepped off the elevator on the 42nd floor and walked straight to the heavy glass doors of Reed, Sterling, and Vance. one of the most cold-blooded and respected commercial law firms in the Pacific Northwest. The receptionist, a sharp young woman who had known me for over a decade, immediately recognized the cold, hardened look on my face. She didn't even bother to ask if I had an appointment. She just nodded quickly, picked up her phone, and tapped a button. Within seconds, the heavy mahogany door at the end of the hall opened. Mitchell Reed stood in the doorway. Mitchell was a 68-year-old legal shark whose custom Italian suit couldn't hide the predatory instincts of an aggressive litigator. For 35 years, he had been my personal attorney, my trusted confidant, and my closest friend. He had professionally drafted every ironclad contract for my construction firm, fighting tooth and nail to protect my wealth from countless commercial predators. Mitchell took one look at my posture, stepped back, and silently welcomed me into his spacious corner office. He shut the heavy doors behind us, ensuring the locks clicked firmly into place. The room was a monument to legal intimidation, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the dark, churning waters of Puget Sound. He didn't offer me a drink, nor did he ask how my morning was going. He walked straight to the massive oak desk, sat in his high-backed leather chair, and fixed his sharp gray eyes on me. "You have the exact same look on your face that you had 20 years ago when you ruthlessly fired your entire executive board," Mitchell said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Tell me, who are we legally destroying today?" I sat in the leather chair opposite him. I didn't waste time with emotional build-up or lengthy explanations. I gave him the raw, unvarnished facts. I told him about the early morning text from Derek about canceling the cruise. I told him about the 3 precisely structured $9,900 cash withdrawals from the joint emergency checking account. Finally, I told him about my quiet trip to the Bellevue mansion. I repeated the terrifying conversation I had overheard between Monica and my son verbatim. I described their calculated plan to illegally purchase a false medical diagnosis of severe Alzheimer's. I detailed their timeline to legally declare me incapacitated and have me forcibly locked away in a secure medical facility, while they safely enjoyed a luxury vacation purchased on my own platinum credit card. Mitchell didn't interrupt me once. He sat perfectly still, his hands clasped tightly together. With every word I uttered, his expression grew darker and significantly more dangerous. When I finally finished, a heavy, suffocating silence filled the office. Mitchell slowly let his hands down and let out a long, intensely controlled sigh. "I warned you about this, Harrison," he said, his tone devoid of judgment but filled with a cold, terrifying professional fury. 7 years ago, when you insisted on buying that incredibly expensive Bellevue property with cash and putting it into a revocable living trust for Derek's free use, I explicitly warned you. I sat in this very chair and told you that handing massive, unrestricted assets to a weak young man and his controlling wife was a recipe for absolute financial disaster. I told you they would eventually view your extraordinary generosity as a permanent weakness. "You were completely right, Mitchell," I replied calmly, not breaking eye contact. I foolishly allowed the deep grief over Diane's passing to cloud my rational judgment. I was desperate to provide him with a beautiful, stress-free life. But I am not here to discuss my past failures as a father. I am here because my own flesh and blood and his horrific wife are actively trying to legally bury me alive. I need to know exactly how far they are in the process. I need to know the specific mechanics of this execution they have planned for me. Mitchell didn't say another word. He immediately swiveled his heavy leather chair toward his multi-monitor computer setup. His fingers flew across his mechanical keyboard with trained, aggressive speed. As a senior partner at a major firm, Mitchell had specialized high-level access to the county superior court's secure digital case records. He bypassed the public portal and dove directly into the restricted back-end filing network, where local attorneys could queue up upcoming legal filings before a judge formally stamped them. For a few agonizing minutes, the crisp sound of his rapid typing was the only noise in the tense room. I watched his eyes scan the dense lines of legal code flashing across the bright monitor. Suddenly, his fingers stopped moving. His jaw tightened visibly, and a dark, dangerous shadow passed over his face. He reached out, grabbed his mouse, and clicked a specific file. Slowly, he turned the massive monitor to face me. The bright screen illuminated the dim room, casting a ghostly pale light over the mahogany desk. I leaned forward, my gaze locked onto the formal legal header at the very top of the digital file. It was an official application for emergency guardianship and declaration of total incapacity. The primary applicant listed was Derek Caldwell. The target respondent was Harrison Caldwell. Mitchell pointed a sharp finger at the screen, his voice strained with barely suppressed rage. "They aren't just talking about it, Harrison. They actually paid a corrupt, unethical attorney to draft the entire execution order. It's fully weaponized and sitting safely in the digital queue. Look at the supporting evidence. They've uploaded a preliminary medical affidavit strongly implying severe, late-stage cognitive decline, a document intentionally signed by a doctor entirely outside your regular medical network. They've documented your recent reclusive behavior from grief as undeniable evidence of severe mental instability. And look at the scheduled filing date." He tapped the bottom of the screen. "Next Tuesday, exactly 48 hours after their massive luxury cruise officially sails out of international communication range." I stared at the glowing document, reading the cold, clinical language. The language was designed to systematically strip me of my basic human rights, seize my entire financial legacy, and forcibly erase me from the civilized world. They intended to quietly submit this massive, irreversible legal bomb to a sympathetic probate judge while they were safely sipping premium champagne on a private ocean balcony, paid for by me. They counted on returning to Seattle, walking off the ship, and casually inheriting my massive wealth while I wasted away in a locked, sterile room. Mitchell turned the monitor back and looked at me, his eyes burning with a fierce, protective rage. "They have officially loaded the gun, Harrison, and they have the barrel pointed directly at your head. If we don't dismantle this completely right now, you will absolutely lose your freedom before this week is over. They think they're dealing with a helpless old man." I slowly stood up from the leather chair and buttoned my heavy wool coat. I looked through the massive window at the dark, churning waters of Puget Sound. I felt absolutely nothing for the boy I had raised. This betrayal was total, absolute, and completely unforgivable. I turned to face my old friend, my voice a whisper of pure, destructive ice. "They aren't dealing with a helpless old man, Mitchell. They are dealing with the architect who built their entire world. And today, we are going to dismantle their pathetic house down to the load-bearing studs. Show me exactly how we are going to financially slaughter them." Mitchell leaned forward, resting his forearms heavily on the mahogany desk. The sharp focus burning in his eyes perfectly mirrored the cold rage surging in my veins. He didn't offer any empty legal platitudes. Instead, he instantly shifted into the tactical mindset that made him the most feared trust attorney in the city. He explained that a direct emotional confrontation would be a massive strategic error. If I simply stormed into that Bellevue mansion, demanding answers, Derek and Monica would realize their sinister plot had been exposed. They would immediately contact their corrupt lawyer, scramble to cover their financial tracks, and likely try to use the emergency psychiatric commitment order to accelerate the guardianship application. We needed to operate in absolute secrecy. We were going to let them pack those designer bags. We were going to let them board that luxury ship tomorrow morning, fully convinced their devastating trap was perfectly set. And while they were isolated in the middle of the Pacific, drinking my expensive champagne, we would systematically dismantle the foundation of their entire existence. The first step in our counterattack was that massive Bellevue estate. When I bought the property for $2.2 million in cash, I structured the ownership through a revocable living trust. At the time, Derek and Monica had been annoyed by the complex legal arrangement, stupidly viewing it as a tedious administrative hurdle. They completely failed to understand the absolute, unquestionable power that specific legal designation granted me. As the sole creator and grantor of that trust, I held the absolute, indisputable power to alter, amend, or completely dissolve the entire legal entity at any moment. I didn't need Derek's signature. I didn't need Monica's permission. I didn't even have a legal obligation to notify them that the status of their primary residence was being permanently altered. The house was essentially a conditional gift. The moment they proved themselves unworthy, and they had just proven themselves actively dangerous, I could withdraw it in a second. Mitchell pulled a thick stack of legal documents from his drawer and slid a gold pen across the wood. He began drafting a formal notice of trust revocation. His sharp mind navigated the complex legal terminology required to immediately strip the property from the trust. The document explicitly declared the original trust agreement null and void. Full ownership of the Bellevue estate, along with all associated tangible assets and equity, would immediately revert entirely to my name. I picked up the heavy gold pen and stared at the pristine paper. For a fleeting second, a ghost of a memory crossed my mind, the image of carrying a young Derek on my shoulders, proudly showing him the freshly poured concrete foundation of his childhood home. But that innocent boy was gone, completely replaced by a treacherous stranger who had conspired to lock me in a medical prison. I gripped the pen tightly and signed my full legal name with a heavy, steady hand. Mitchell immediately took the document and stamped it with his official notary seal, pressing down with a loud click. He swiftly handed the papers to his senior paralegal, a stern and efficient woman who had just silently entered the office, instructing her to deliver them personally to the county recorder and file them before the afternoon deadline. With that single, binding signature, Derek and Monica were officially stripped of their most valuable asset. They were no longer living in a multi-million-dollar luxury estate. They were now unauthorized occupants in a home owned entirely by the man they were actively conspiring to destroy. The financial slaughter had only just begun. We moved immediately to the second phase, the joint emergency checking account, the very same one they had used to structure their illegal $30,000 cash withdrawal. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my smartphone, and laid it flat on the desk between us. I opened my banking app and navigated to the emergency ledger. The screen displayed an available balance of just over $400,000. This was a substantial amount of liquid cash, accumulated by Diane and me through decades of hard physical labor. It was meant to protect our family from genuine tragedy, not to fund a corrupt medical conspiracy. Mitchell pulled his chair closer, his eyes locked on the glowing screen. As my counsel, he needed to witness the entire transaction to ensure no accusations of asset mismanagement could be leveled against me later. I clicked the transfer icon, selecting the joint account as the source. I then chose a private, highly secure personal account I had kept completely separate from the family trust. I carefully entered the exact amount, down to the last cent. I left them with $0 to fall back on. I left them with nothing to pay their monthly utilities or their luxury car insurance. I paused for a final second, my finger hovering over the bright green confirm button. I pictured Monica laughing in her sunny bedroom, mocking my grief. I pictured the corrupt doctor signing the false medical file. I thought of Derek, my own flesh and blood, cowardly enabling this entire sinister operation. I pressed the button. The screen refreshed instantly. The balance of the joint emergency account plummeted from over $400,000 to zero. That life-changing sum was legally transferred into my indestructible personal account. Mitchell leaned back in his leather chair, a look of profound professional satisfaction on his chiseled face. He clapped his hands softly, the crisp sound echoing in the quiet room. "You have officially cut their primary financial lifeline, Harrison," he said, his voice calm and measured. "The house is yours. The liquid cash is yours. By the time they board that ship tomorrow, they will be operating entirely on financial fumes without even knowing it. But we have one critical task left before they sail. We must neutralize that pending court petition before their corrupt lawyer submits it next Tuesday." I picked up my phone and slid it back into my coat pocket. The heavy, suffocating burn in my chest had been replaced by a sea of pure, frozen ice. I looked Mitchell in the eyes, teeth clenched, with absolute resolve. "We aren't just neutralizing their pathetic court filing, Mitchell. We are actively going to flip it to legally bury them. Tell me exactly how." Mitchell's eyes narrowed, catching the cold gray light in the office with a predator's glint. He leaned back and clasped his fingers together again. He began explaining the standard defensive strategy, filing for an emergency counterinjunction to preemptively report their forged medical documents to the court. He proposed dragging them into years of expensive litigation until they were bankrupt. But I shook my head slowly. A protracted legal stalemate in a cold courtroom was far too kind for what they had planned for me. I didn't want to give them the luxury of time, the ability to hire defense counsel, or the comfort of a warm bed while they fought us. I wanted total, instantaneous financial annihilation. I wanted them to return from their luxury cruise, to find their entire universe had been fundamentally erased. "We are going to sell the Bellevue estate," I said flatly, every word hitting the polished desk like a lead weight. "Not next month, not next week. We are selling it now, before they have a chance to order the first premium cocktail on that ship." Mitchell blinked, momentarily stunned by the sheer aggression of the pivot. He quickly recovered his legal mind, racing through the logic. He reminded me that traditional real estate transactions take 30 to 60 days to close. They would be back from vacation, long before the property officially changed hands. But I wasn't talking about a traditional, comfortable real estate transaction. I was talking about a cold-blooded corporate liquidation. In my 40 years as a commercial construction manager, I had dealt with every imaginable real estate investor in the greater Seattle area. When a massive property needs to disappear from the ledger overnight, I know exactly who to call. There is a very specific, highly profitable subculture in real estate specializing in corporate cash flipping. These are massive enterprise investment groups that acquire distressed or urgent properties at deep discounts. They bypass the sluggish traditional banking system entirely. They can buy a property without even looking at it, utilizing deep liquid cash reserves to complete massive transactions in days, skipping the exhaustive appraisal and inspection process. I pulled my smartphone from my coat pocket and scrolled past Derek's traitorous contact info. I stopped at a name I hadn't dialed in nearly a decade. Victor Rossi. Victor was a cold-blooded, highly efficient corporate real estate shark who ran the largest cash-flipping syndicate on the West Coast. Back in the days when I was liquidating old industrial warehouses, he and I had completed a few highly profitable, discrete transactions. Victor only cared about two things in this world: speed and massive profit margins. I hit the call button, turned on the speakerphone, and placed the device in the center of Mitchell's desk. It rang twice before a sharp, gravelly voice answered. "Harrison Caldwell," Victor boomed, his tone filled with genuine surprise. "I thought you officially retired and moved to some golf course. What does a retired construction tycoon want with a guy like me on a damp Thursday afternoon? I need to liquidate a premium residential asset, Victor, I replied smoothly, without any casual pleasantries. And I need it done faster than any transaction in your career. The casual warmth in Victor's voice vanished, replaced by the cold, calculating edge of a predator smelling blood. Define your timeline, Harrison. What are we talking about? I have a pristine, modern architectural estate sitting on a premium dual lot in an incredibly exclusive Bellevue cul-de-sac, I stated with precise, deliberate clarity. The current market appraisal for this property is $2.2 million. I hold the absolute, unencumbered fee simple title in my name. No liens, no outstanding mortgage, and absolutely no legal encumbrances. The title is perfection. I paused, letting the immense value of the asset hang in the air. I knew Victor was already rapidly calculating the comps for that neighborhood in his head. I will sell the entire estate to you at a flat 20% discount, I continued, dangling the massive financial bait. $1.76 million cash, but I have two absolute non-negotiable conditions. First, we must close this transaction and formally record the deed transfer in exactly 3 days. No standard inspections, no lengthy appraisals, no financing delays, pure liquid cash wired directly into my attorney's escrow account. By Monday morning at the latest. I heard a low whistle over the speaker. For a cash flipper, getting a 20% discount on a flawless mansion in Bellevue was a rare, incredibly profitable spread. Victor didn't even hesitate. If the title is as clean as you say, Harrison, I can have my corporate legal team wire the full amount by 9:00 a.m. Monday. What is the second condition? This was the final, devastating strike. This was the exact mechanism that would erase Derek and Monica's comfortable reality. The property must be sold strictly as is, Victor, I said, my voice dropping into a chilling bass. And when I say as is, I specifically mean the absolute entirety of its current interior physical contents. Every piece of custom imported furniture, every expensive television, every designer gown hanging in the walk-in closet, every expensive piece of jewelry left in the drawers, and every digital device scattered on the countertops. You buy the house, you gain legal ownership of absolutely everything currently within those walls. I want your aggressive cleanup crew waiting in the driveway Tuesday morning. I want them to throw absolutely everything that remains in that house directly into industrial dumpsters. Keep what you want to sell and physically destroy the rest. A heavy silence fell over the speaker. Even Victor, a seasoned, cold-hearted liquidator, was momentarily stunned by the sheer, unadulterated aggression of the request. But business was business, and the profit margin was undeniable. You are a terrifying man when you are highly motivated, Harrison, Victor finally replied, a dark chuckle coming through the audio connection. It's a deal. Send the legal address and the title documents to my acquisition team. We'll begin drafting the binding purchase agreement immediately. I ended the call decisively and looked up to meet Mitchell's eyes across the desk. My highly experienced attorney was staring at me with a look of profound, visceral awe. He silently acknowledged the absolute brilliance of the move. The intricate financial trap was firmly in motion. We were fully prepared for their total legal destruction. Mitchell leaned back in his heavy leather chair and let out a low whistle of genuine admiration. Liquidating a multi-million-dollar estate to a corporate flipping syndicate in 72 hours was a pure masterstroke. I thanked my old friend for his swift legal execution and shook his hand firmly. We had successfully initiated the dismantling of their primary financial foundation, but the psychological war had only just begun. I stepped out of the towering downtown office building and back onto the damp Seattle sidewalk. The heavy rain had finally stopped, leaving the gray city streets slick and reflective under the afternoon sky. I climbed back into the familiar cockpit of my truck, completely ignoring the damp chill seeping through my wool coat. I placed my hands on the steering wheel, taking a moment to fully digest the immensely satisfying reality of what we had just accomplished. Derek and Monica were currently spending their entire afternoon packing their expensive designer luggage. Internally convinced, they had perfectly outsmarted a sad, helpless old man. They believed their vicious legal filing was safe and ready to strip me of my existence. They were gleefully preparing to embark on a massive luxury cruise that I had meticulously organized and fully funded. They thought I was sitting at home crying over old photos and slowly losing my mind. Instead, I was actively dismantling every single thread of their comfortable, unearned life. However, taking the house and the emergency cash wasn't enough. I wanted them to feel the profound consequences of their arrogance deeply, in their skin. I wanted them to experience the exact same terrifying sense of helplessness they had so casually planned to inflict upon me. I didn't want them to simply find themselves homeless and penniless while standing comfortably in their own driveway. I wanted them completely trapped. I wanted them totally isolated in international waters, surrounded by the peak luxury they could suddenly no longer afford. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my smartphone, and opened the contact list. I bypassed my personal network and navigated directly to the saved booking files for our upcoming Alaskan voyage. I dialed the main customer service number for the Royal Caribbean Executive Booking Desk. The call connected instantly, bypassing a short automated menu. A warm, highly professional voice answered, greeted me by name, and thanked me enthusiastically for my high loyalty status. The representative asked how she could assist me with the upcoming owner's suite embarkation. I kept my voice perfectly smooth and completely calm, not revealing a hint of the cold rage burning in my chest. I provided my secure booking reference number, my personal identification details, and the primary billing zip code to fully verify my authorized status. She efficiently confirmed my identity and asked cheerfully if I needed to arrange any last-minute shore excursions or perhaps upgrade our premium dining package. I politely declined her offer. I told her I needed to make a very specific, immediate administrative adjustment to the primary passenger profile. I explained that a sudden and unavoidable personal matter had unfortunately arisen, and I would absolutely not be boarding the ship tomorrow morning. The representative immediately offered her well-trained condolences, assuming I wanted to cancel the entire booking and initiate the standard refund process. She began to explain the late cancellation penalties, but I interrupted her scripted response quickly and firmly. I clarified my exact intention. I stated clearly that I was not canceling the physical cruise tickets. The remaining passengers listed on the primary profile, Derek Caldwell, Monica Caldwell, and Bradley Sterling, were absolutely still planning to board and embark on the scheduled Alaskan itinerary. I wanted their physical boarding passes to remain fully activated and entirely valid. The representative paused for a moment, slightly confused by the unusual request, but quickly confirmed that the secondary passengers could absolutely continue their vacation without my physical presence. That was exactly what I needed to hear. Then I delivered the final, devastating blow. I am instructing you to immediately and permanently remove my primary platinum credit card from the central onboard spending account. I am cutting off all financial responsibility for the remaining passengers. I require my card to be completely unlinked from their individual cabin keys, their digital profiles, and any associated shipboard credit limits. The representative fell silent for a fleeting moment. She was likely reading the long list of premium drink packages, luxury spa appointments, and expensive specialty dining reservations already linked to that card. She cautiously informed me that doing so would immediately cancel all those premium arrangements. I told her that was exactly my intention. I firmly reiterated that Derek, Monica, and Bradley must now be fully responsible for providing their own independent payment methods upon arriving at the embarkation terminal. If they wanted premium alcoholic beverages, high-speed satellite internet, or any exclusive shore excursions, they would have to personally present their own credit cards to the purser. I waited patiently on the line, listening to her rapid keystrokes as she officially executed my precise orders. She read a formal disclosure confirming my financial liability had terminated, and that the remaining passengers would be presented with a zero-balance bill upon boarding. I thanked her for her efficient assistance and promptly ended the call. I set the phone on the passenger seat of my truck, and a cold, undeniable smirk finally surfaced on my face. The trap was now completely set. The noose was flawless, and the bait was too rich for them to resist. They would wake up tomorrow morning, load their massive, stuffed designer suitcases into a premium rideshare, and head eagerly to the bustling Seattle cruise terminal. They would successfully scan their activated boarding passes, step into that massive floating palace, and head straight for the nearest luxury bar to celebrate their perceived victory. Bradley would confidently order the most expensive vintage bourbon available. Monica would loudly demand a bottle of exclusive imported champagne, and Derek would smugly hand his cabin key to the bartender, fully expecting my limitless platinum account to absorb the impact. The absolute humiliation they were about to experience when that card was ruthlessly declined would be glorious. They would stand in the middle of a crowded luxury lounge, severed from my wealth, forced to desperately empty their own dried-up bank accounts just to purchase basic internet access. They would be physically trapped on a massive ship in the middle of the cold ocean for 10 long, agonizing days, slowly realizing their infinite financial printing press had completely derailed. And while they desperately tried to figure out how to pay their exorbitant bar tabs, Victor Rossi and his aggressive corporate cleanup team would be violently tossing their entire, pretentious, vanity-filled life into a rusted steel dumpster. I laughed. The next morning arrived with a crisp, damp chill that perfectly defined the early spring climate of the Pacific Northwest. It was a stark contrast to the grim, gray sky that had mirrored my initial grief just days earlier. I woke before dawn, sipping black coffee in my kitchen, methodically reviewing the schedule. By 8:00 a.m., I had parked in the elevated parking garage overlooking the bustling Seattle cruise terminal. The massive, snow-white luxury ocean liner dominated the waterfront, preparing to set sail for Alaska. The terminal was a chaotic scene of activity. Streams of taxis and shuttle buses constantly pulled into the unloading area, discharging hundreds of eager passengers. I sat comfortably in my truck with a pair of compact binoculars on the center console. I didn't need them yet. I knew exactly what time they would arrive. Derek was always remarkably punctual when it came to his own enjoyment. Right on cue, a black premium SUV glided smoothly into the designated VIP drop-off lane. The driver stepped out and quickly opened the back door. My heart beat in a slow, mechanical rhythm as I watched Derek step onto the concrete. He was dressed in expensive nautical resort wear, looking completely relaxed and incredibly carefree. Monica followed, her face hidden behind oversized designer sunglasses, gesturing dramatically for the driver to handle her massive array of luggage. Then came Bradley, hopping out of the car in a brightly colored tropical print shirt that looked ridiculously comical in the biting Seattle wind. They stood together on the sidewalk, laughing loudly, completely immersed in their unearned arrogance. They handed their luggage to a diligent porter, expecting my prestigious membership status to smooth over every step of their VIP boarding process. I picked up my digital tablet from the passenger seat and opened my main social media app. Months ago, I had created an anonymous account to track the family updates Derek often forgot to share. I navigated directly to Monica's public feed. She had just posted a brand new, heavily filtered photo of the three of them proudly standing in front of that massive ship. The caption below read, "About to embark on our much-needed, hard-earned luxury vacation. Time to leave all the stress behind and completely spoil ourselves." A champagne glass emoji punctuated the ridiculous statement. Hard-earned. The level of pure delusion required to type those words after funding a corrupt medical trap with stolen cash was staggering. They genuinely believed they had successfully outmaneuvered me. They were convinced the hardest part of their sinister plan was behind them, completely unaware they were walking directly into a flawless, inescapable financial cage. I watched through the windshield as they strolled casually through the heavy glass doors of the main terminal, disappearing into the VIP security queue. They would be fast-tracked directly onto the ship, bypassing the long lines of ordinary passengers. I knew the exact layout of that vessel. I knew they would head straight for the exclusive high-deck lounge, eagerly anticipating their premium welcome package. I sat in the truck for another 2 hours, patiently watching the endless stream of passengers board the ship. The massive gangway was finally pulled away. The heavy mooring lines were systematically uncoiled from the concrete bollards. A deep, powerful vibration echoed through the damp air, and the truck's windows rattled as the ship's massive engines roared to life. Then an incredibly loud, deafening blast of the ship's primary whistle echoed across the water. It was a triumphant, declarative sound. The massive white vessel began to move away from the pier slowly and steadily, churning the dark waters of Puget Sound into a thick white foam. I watched the ship gracefully pivot, pointing its massive bow directly toward the vast ocean. They were finally underway. In just a few hours, they would lose all standard land-based cellular signals. They would be entirely reliant on the ship's incredibly expensive satellite internet connection, a premium service they now had absolutely no financial means to access seamlessly. They were completely isolated, suspended perfectly in international waters, cut off from their corrupt lawyer and the reality of the heavily mortgaged life they had left on solid ground. I shifted my truck into gear, pulled away from the waterfront, and drove straight back to the financial district. Mitchell Reed was already waiting for me in the executive conference room at his law firm. Sitting opposite him was Victor Rossi, flanked by 2 of his own aggressive corporate attorneys. The atmosphere in the room was chillingly businesslike. No pleasantries, no small talk about the weather. We were here to execute a highly profitable, deeply devastating corporate liquidation. Victor laid a thick stack of finalized closing documents neatly on the polished mahogany table. His legal team had thoroughly verified the unencumbered status of the Bellevue estate. They knew they were acquiring an incredibly valuable asset at a massive 20% discount, and they were eager to finalize the transaction before I could change my mind. I sat at the table and picked up the heavy, gold-plated fountain pen Mitchell had provided for the occasion. I carefully read the binding terms. The wording was exceptionally clear and completely unforgiving. The sale was strictly and undisputedly, as is. The buyer gained absolute, total ownership of the physical property and all of its current contents. Victor's aggressive demolition crew was officially authorized to forcibly enter the property at 8:00 a.m. tomorrow morning and begin the total physical liquidation. I brought the nib to the thick paper and signed my legal name on the final signature line. I pushed the signed documents across the table to Victor. He reviewed the signature, gave his lead attorney a sharp nod, and smoothly pulled a secure digital authentication token from his jacket pocket. Victor entered a rapid sequence of digits into the token, authorizing the immediate release of the massive funds. We waited in absolute silence. Less than 3 minutes later, my personal smartphone lit up on the table. It was a highly secure priority alert from my primary banking institution. I picked up the device and opened the encrypted message. The notification was brief, simple, and absolutely final. A federal wire transfer of $1.76 million had successfully cleared and was now permanently settled in my indestructible personal account. The money was locked. The transaction was absolutely irreversible. Victor stood firmly, shook my hand, and strode out of the room with his legal team to immediately dispatch his property extraction crew. I stood alone with Mitchell in the quiet conference room. That massive Bellevue mansion, the physical manifestation of all their arrogance, absolutely no longer belonged to my son. Their expensive cars, their designer wardrobes, and every piece of furniture they once possessed were about to be violently tossed into a commercial dumpster. The financial slaughter had been executed flawlessly, and my treacherous son was now completely trapped on a floating island, utterly powerless to stop any of it. I sat in the comfort of my quiet living room, the glowing embers in the fireplace casting a warm, flickering light on the hardwood floor. A steaming cup of black coffee sat on the table beside me. The house was dead silent, completely devoid of the suffocating grief that had plagued me just days earlier. Hundreds of miles away, completely swallowed by the vast, cold waters of the North Pacific, my son and his treacherous wife were currently experiencing the undeniable reality of their actions. The cruise industry operates on a very specific, completely cashless financial model. The moment a passenger steps onto the deck, physical money becomes entirely useless. Every single transaction, from premium dining and luxury spa treatments to satellite internet and top-shelf liquor, is handled entirely through a digital cabin key called a CPASS card. That plastic card must be securely backed by a valid, activated credit account. I had thoroughly severed that vital financial lifeline. I knew it would take several hours for the ship to enter international waters and update its internal billing network. Right on schedule, my smartphone began to buzz on the coffee table. Because they were completely cut off from standard cellular towers, they were forced to rely on the ship's incredibly restricted, extremely weak emergency satellite network to make outgoing calls. The connection quality was atrocious, laced with severe electrical static, but the frantic, desperate voice messages they left in my secure voicemail system laid their absolute panic out in agonizingly clear detail. I took a slow sip of coffee, leaned back into the leather armchair, and clicked the screen to play the first recording. Derek's voice echoed in the quiet room. He sounded nothing like the smug, calculating man who had confidently signed legal documents to steal my freedom. He sounded completely terrified, his breathing short and panicked. He explained frantically that a massive, incredibly embarrassing misunderstanding had just occurred in the main luxury lounge. Monica, surrounded by her entire arrogant family, had proudly marched up to the premium bar and loudly ordered a $500 bottle of exclusive vintage champagne to grandly celebrate the start of their luxury vacation. The bartender expertly took her cabin key, swiped it on the terminal, and immediately informed her that the transaction had been flatly declined. Derek described the moment of pure, agonizing humiliation in vivid detail in the message. Monica had engaged in a fierce, loud scene with the bartender in front of dozens of wealthy passengers, sparking a massive, incredibly noisy drama. She demanded the staff swipe the card again, arrogantly declaring the account was backed by an unlimited platinum credit. The bartender tried multiple times before escalating the issue to the purser, who coldly informed them that the primary funding source had been explicitly and permanently revoked by the account holder. Derek was practically begging me to call the cruise line to fix what he assumed was a simple administrative banking error. He pleaded that Monica's parents were incredibly furious and extremely embarrassed by the public scene. I let the first voice message end, then smoothly clicked the screen to play the second. This recording was left a full 40 minutes later. The initial confusion in Derek's voice had evaporated, completely replaced by a raw, pure, suffocating panic. He had run straight to the guest services desk to purchase a premium satellite internet package so he could log into his own mobile banking app and transfer funds to save face. The premium internet connection cost $100 per day. Derek confidently handed the purser his physical debit card, the one linked directly to our joint emergency checking account, the very same one they had used to illegally bribe the corrupt doctor. He told me in the message, his voice cracking with absolute desperation, that the debit card had been flatly declined due to insufficient funds. He was completely losing his mind, loudly demanding to know how a bank account that held $400,000 in liquid cash could possibly show a cruel, undeniable zero balance. He begged me to pick up the phone. He pleaded for me to contact the financial institution and report a massive, catastrophic bank fraud. He had the brazen audacity to demand that I protect the very money he had systematically planned to use to legally destroy me permanently. I listened to his pathetic, broken voice and felt an overwhelming, cold, calculated satisfaction wash over my body. They were finally beginning to understand the terrifying, full scope of their miserable situation. They were physically trapped in a giant metal box in the middle of the cold ocean. They had absolutely no usable credit cards, zero available cash, and absolutely no way to generate any liquidity. The third and final voice message was the most revealing. It wasn't Derek, it was Monica. The incredibly arrogant sense of superiority she had displayed in the Bellevue mansion was completely gone. She was practically sobbing into the microphone. She sobbed about how her entire family had turned on her. Bradley, her parasitic brother, was having a massive, explosive meltdown in the hallway because he couldn't order a single drink. He had rushed to the poolside bar ready to begin his 10-day bender, only to be cruelly told his cabin key was financially locked. Monica cried that they were officially banned from all the specialty restaurants on the ship. Because they had absolutely no valid method of payment, they were strictly downgraded to eating at the massive, crowded free buffet, shoved in with thousands of ordinary passengers she always mocked. She wailed about how humiliating it was to stand in long lines just to get a plate of free pasta. She vividly described the burning, judgmental glares of her wealthy parents, who had fully expected to enjoy flawless, highly attended luxury at my expense. Instead, her parents were now trapped in a tiny standard cabin, furious because their premium reservations had been completely canceled. Monica begged me to fix the accounts, promising to apologize for any minor slights she supposedly committed. She still genuinely believed this was just a trivial, temporary punishment for some minor disagreement. She had absolutely no idea that while she was crying over a declined bottle of expensive champagne and a ruined dinner reservation, my real estate contact was actively finalizing the complete demolition of her entire life back on dry land. I slowly deleted the 3 voice messages permanently, wiping their desperate, begging voices from my secure digital server. I placed the smartphone back on the sturdy wooden table and took another slow, deeply satisfied sip of hot coffee. Let them stand in line for the free buffet. Let them endure the cold, relentless wrath of her humiliated and arrogant family. Let them be trapped on that massive ship for 10 full days, slowly spiraling into total, absolute financial madness. They absolutely deserved every agonizing second of this flawless nautical nightmare. Their precious vacation had officially turned into a floating prison. The next morning arrived bright and clear, a stark contrast to the heavy, gray gloom that had mirrored my initial grief just days earlier. The crisp air felt invigorating as I drove my truck across the bridge toward the affluent, manicured neighborhoods of Bellevue. I parked a street away from the estate that no longer belonged to my treacherous son. I stopped at a corner coffee shop, bought a black coffee, and strolled back toward the property. I stood comfortably on the public sidewalk across the quiet, tree-lined street. The neighborhood was serene, filled with the faint hum of automatic sprinklers and the distant sound of landscaping crews. It was a picture of suburban peace, oblivious to the corporate liquidation about to unfold violently. I stood there, wrapping my cold hands around the warm paper cup, staring at the exterior of the house I had bought out of parental love. At exactly 7:45 a.m., the heavy roar of diesel engines shattered the peace of the neighborhood. Two massive roll-off dumpsters backed into the wide, stamped concrete driveway. The heavy steel wheels gouged deep, unforgiving furrows into the once flawless landscaping that Monica had arrogantly demanded I pay for last spring. Following the dumpsters, 3 large box trucks pulled to the curb. 12 burly, efficient workers in work boots swarmed out of the vehicles. Victor Rossi had absolutely kept his word. These were hardened property extraction specialists, accustomed to corporate-level liquidations. They operated with a cold precision that was absolutely terrifying to witness. The foreman, a hulking man holding a heavy steel pry bar and a clipboard, walked straight to the custom front door. He didn't bother trying to pick the expensive smart lock. He simply wedged the steel bar into the door frame and jerked it back with force. With a loud crack, the locking mechanism was completely shattered. The heavy wooden door swung open, exposing the flawless interior of Derek and Monica's stolen sanctuary. The financial slaughter began instantly. The workers swarmed into the spacious, sunlit foyer like an organized, relentless army of locusts. Within minutes, the massive front door was permanently wedged open, and the physical eradication of their entire vain lifestyle officially roared to life. 2 burly workers walked out the front door carrying Monica's cherished custom-imported Italian velvet sofa. I remembered the exact day she bought them. She had handed my platinum card to an elite interior designer without hesitation, dropping tens of thousands in a single afternoon, claiming she simply needed the living room to properly reflect her elevated social status. With deep satisfaction, I watched the workers casually drag that exorbitantly expensive white velvet across the rough concrete porch. They hoisted the sofa over the rusted steel edge and let it slam violently into the empty metal dumpster. The delicate, imported fabric tore instantly on the sharp edge of the rusted container, destroying the massive investment in less than 5 seconds. There was no pause in this parade of ruthless destruction. Another group of workers began violently throwing massive black trash bags down from the second-floor master bedroom windows, aiming for the open dumpster below. The bags were filled with Monica's incredibly expensive, curated designer wardrobe. Hundreds of silk dresses, high-end handbags, and imported European shoes poured into the filthy metal bin like common household garbage. She had been eagerly planning which expensive vacation outfits to proudly wear on the cruise deck, blissfully unaware that her entire material existence was being tossed into the heap. Then came Derek's prized possessions. A worker walked out of the garage casually, carrying 2 heavy, premium leather golf bags filled with custom, incredibly expensive titanium clubs. Derek had insisted he needed this professional-grade equipment to properly build social networks with wealthy executives. The worker grabbed the premium leather straps, swung the bags through the air, and aggressively slammed them against the high steel walls of the dumpster. The incredibly satisfying sound of titanium shafts bending and carbon fiber snapping echoed loudly down the quiet suburban street. I took another slow, deep sip of hot coffee. At the same time, another specialized crew arrived in a small utility vehicle. Completely ignoring the massive furniture being violently tossed out, they headed straight for the main entrance. They carried heavy-duty power drills, brand new brass hardware, and heavy metal strike plates. Victor Rossi was officially securing his newly acquired asset. The workers aggressively removed the broken electronic smart locks Monica had previously set with her personal security codes. They installed heavy, commercial-grade deadbolts on every exterior door of the massive estate. The physical manifestation of this total exclusion was incredibly powerful to witness. Even if Derek and Monica somehow managed to escape their floating nautical prison and somehow caught a ride back to this specific street, they would find absolutely nothing waiting for them. Their custom digital access codes were permanently erased. Their physical keys were completely useless. They were now totally locked out of the same property they had once arrogantly claimed was their absolute birthright. For 3 incredibly chaotic hours, this aggressive extraction team ruthlessly gutted the $2.2 million property. They systematically stripped every television, every piece of expensive modern art, every custom-imported rug, and every digital device left lying on the granite kitchen countertops. The massive steel dumpsters were quickly filled to the brim with the shattered, destroyed remains of their unearned, pretentious lifestyle. Not a single photo, not a single piece of expensive jewelry, and not a single pair of designer sunglasses survived this violent, unforgiving corporate liquidation. Everything they owned, everything they had arrogantly bought with my stolen wealth, was treated coldly as completely discarded, worthless trash. When this massive operation was finally complete, the foreman blew a sharp whistle. The workers scrambled back into their unmarked vehicles. A hydraulic diesel truck backed into the driveway, secured the massive steel dumpsters, and slowly dragged them toward the municipal landfill. The quiet, affluent neighborhood slowly returned to its original, serene state, completely undisturbed by the absolute destruction that had just occurred on that specific premium lot. I stayed on the sidewalk for a few more minutes, just staring at the completely empty, thoroughly sealed house. The massive front windows, once framed by expensive silk curtains, now exposed only hollow, echoing rooms. The total physical eradication of Derek and Monica Caldwell was officially complete. They were absolutely homeless, possessed no material assets to their names, and their bank accounts were empty. They were currently trapped in the middle of the cold ocean, desperately drowning in a profound, inescapable financial nightmare of their own design. I slowly crushed the empty paper coffee cup in my right hand, turned my back on the empty, soulless estate, and walked calmly toward my waiting truck, feeling an overwhelming, absolute, incredibly profound and permanent, undeniable peace. 10 days is a very short period on the grand scale of a human life. But when you are trapped in a floating metal cage caused by your own financial destruction, 10 days can easily be stretched into an absolute eternity of suffering. I didn't need to stand personally at the Seattle port to know exactly how this miserable disembarkation unfolded. My private investigator, Robert Sanchez, had discreetly positioned himself near the main terminal entrance, providing me with highly detailed, real-time audio updates from a safe distance. The massive white ocean liner drifted slowly back to the pier on a heavy, overcast morning, but there was absolutely no joy radiating from the returning passengers I was tracking. While thousands of sunburnt, exhausted, but happy travelers were rushing down the main gangway, my treacherous son and his parasitic in-laws were severely delayed. They were forcibly detained at the central guest service desk for nearly 2 hours, arguing heatedly with the crew's purser over their massive, completely unpaid onboard gratuities and mandatory service charges. Because my platinum card had been permanently revoked and their personal debit accounts had been completely drained, they were utterly unable to settle their final digital bill. Robert reported quietly that Monica looked unrecognizable. Her perfectly manicured, curated socialite appearance had completely shattered. She was wearing the same designer sweatpants that were wrinkled from when she boarded. She was pale, and her hair was pulled back into an incredibly messy knot. Her parents, who had proudly expected to be treated like nautical royalty, were radiating a toxic, furious silence. They completely refused to look at Derek. Having been forced to endure 10 full days of involuntary sobriety, Bradley was pacing nervously near the terminal exit, shivering in the damp Seattle wind. They had spent the entire luxury vacation isolated in a windowless interior cabin, eating at the free buffet, and arguing bitterly over who held ultimate responsibility for this catastrophic banking error. They were completely convinced that a massive, automated fraud alert had temporarily frozen their assets. They genuinely believed that as soon as they stepped off the ship and found a stable cellular signal, a single tough phone call to the bank would instantly restore their unearned wealth. They desperately fished out the last remaining remnants of physical currency they had on them. Between the 5 of them, they barely managed to scrape together a little over $80 in scattered, crumpled bills. That was barely enough to call a standard economy taxi van for their long trek back to the affluent suburbs. Robert watched from afar as they awkwardly, aggressively stuffed their massive, heavy designer suitcases into the trunk of the scratched-up yellow vehicle. They were squeezed into the backseat like miserable sardines, knees pressed tightly together, the incredibly heavy tension inside the cabin completely suffocating them all. Derek desperately tried to salvage the last shred of his pathetic male dignity, loudly assuring his furious father-in-law that everything would be completely resolved within the hour. He loudly declared this banking issue was merely a simple clerical error, and viciously swore he would drive straight to the local courthouse first thing tomorrow morning. He promised, with extreme aggression, to file an emergency guardianship application immediately, declare his father completely incapacitated legally, and finally seize permanent control over the entire family fortune. He was desperately planning the complete legal execution of me from the cramped backseat of that foul-smelling, poorly maintained commercial taxi. The yellow van merged onto the busy interstate, cautiously navigating the crowded morning rush hour traffic toward the affluent, highly manicured neighborhood of Bellevue. The ride took nearly 45 minutes. Every mile brought them closer to the final, devastating reality check of their completely miserable lives. I sat comfortably in Mitchell Reed's towering downtown office, quietly listening to the live audio feed. As the taxi finally pulled into their exclusive, tree-lined, beautiful residential district, things went exactly as I expected. The quiet, serene street looked exactly the same as always, until the taxi slowly pulled up to the familiar premium lot and stopped. In that instant, the deafening dead silence that erupted inside that taxi must have been incomparable in its beauty to experience firsthand. The beautiful property they had once so proudly called their own had been completely transformed into an unrecognizable form. It no longer looked like a flawless, multi-million-dollar residential sanctuary. It looked like an aggressive, incredibly active commercial construction site. Victor Rossi had absolutely not wasted a single second maximizing the value of his new investment. The incredibly lush, manicured lawn that Monica had once maintained, with an incredibly fanatic, paranoid obsession, was deeply scarred by massive, heavy-duty diesel tire tracks. A huge, bright red commercial real estate sign was deeply embedded in the soft front yard, boldly proclaiming "Sold" in huge, undeniable white letters. The elegant custom front door had been completely removed, replaced entirely by heavy plywood temporary boards, secured tightly with thick steel chains and a massive commercial padlock. The large bay windows on the bottom floor were heavily covered with thick plastic sheets, actively being prepared for a highly destructive corporate renovation. The inside of the massive house was pitch black, completely empty, and thoroughly stripped of all the previous domestic life. But the true, absolute terror of their newfound situation was waiting directly on the damp concrete curb. Robert narrated the incredibly chaotic scene softly. Derek and Monica stumbled out of the yellow taxi, their mouths wide open, trapped in a state of pure, unadulterated, brain-numbing shock. They stood completely paralyzed on the public sidewalk, blankly staring at the exact spot where they usually placed their municipal trash cans on pickup day. Piled there, incredibly casually and incredibly chaotically into a small mountain, were dozens of heavy black industrial trash bags. The plastic bags were violently torn at the seams, completely exposing the ruined, discarded remnants of their entire, pretentious, highly leveraged lifestyle. A smashed, severely bent titanium golf club protruded incredibly sharply from one of the incredibly bulging bags. An incredibly expensive, carefully imported designer silk dress hung loosely from another bag, completely soaked through by the damp, dirty morning pavement. Victor's aggressive extraction team had ruthlessly and absolutely perfectly executed my incredibly harsh orders. They had quickly emptied the massive house down to the bare wooden studs, violently ripping out every single material item Derek and Monica had once proudly owned. And placed directly on top of this mountain of discarded, thoroughly ruined designer goods was a massive, hand-painted cardboard sign, scribbled hastily in thick, black permanent marker by some anonymous demolition worker. The rough sign simply said, "Free to take." Derek blindly dropped his expensive leather travel bag directly onto the wet sidewalk. He took 2 steps toward the pile of trash, his legs shaking, his brain completely unable to process the sheer magnitude of the visual information before him. Monica finally let out an incredibly repressed, beast-like scream, a sound of pure desperation echoing through the quiet street. Her furious parents stood silently behind the idling taxi, feeling absolute nausea and disgust. They finally realized their precious son-in-law was a completely bankrupt, thoroughly homeless con artist who had just been systematically eradicated by the very man he had tried to destroy. Just as Robert quietly relayed the glorious details of this roadside mental breakdown through my earpiece, I was nowhere near Bellevue. I was sitting comfortably in the incredibly exclusive first-class lounge at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport in a luxurious leather armchair. The noise of the terminal environment was completely blocked out by the thick glass windows. I was drinking a perfectly brewed espresso, watching massive commercial jetliners glide slowly across the damp tarmac. The pure contrast between my serene, luxurious environment and the absolute chaos of destruction unfolding on that damp suburban sidewalk was incredibly satisfying. I had booked a premium first-class ticket to a sunny, quiet island in the Caribbean. I decided I truly deserved a real, incredibly relaxing vacation. After meticulously dismantling the treacherous life of my only son and his incredibly arrogant wife, I took another slow, deeply appreciative sip of coffee, feeling the warm liquid soothe the last remaining trace of tension in my chest. My smartphone lay flat on the polished glass tabletop next to the espresso cup. The screen remained completely dark for several minutes as Robert summarized his detailed surveillance report and quietly ended our secure call. He confirmed that the incredibly furious parents had called another taxi, completely abandoning their disgraced daughter and humiliated son-in-law on the side of the road. I knew exactly what would happen next. Derek would aggressively go through the standard stages of grief and absolute panic. He would angrily try to unlock his frozen banking app. He would desperately attempt to contact the corporate real estate agent listed on the massive red sign in the front yard. And finally, when absolutely all escape routes were cruelly slapped directly in his face, he would be forced to call the man he had so cold-bloodedly conspired to lock away in a sterile medical facility. Right on cue, the smartphone lit up, emitting a harsh buzzing sound on the smooth glass surface. Derek's name appeared on the caller ID. I didn't answer immediately. I leaned back into the comfortable chair, watched the bright screen blink, and let the incoming call ring a full 5 times. I wanted him to sweat. I wanted the cold, undeniable fear of absolute financial destruction to soak completely into his brain before he heard my voice. On the 6th ring, I reached out calmly, picked up the device and pressed the green button. I held the phone to my ear, maintaining a deliberate, perfect silence. "Dad," Derek screamed into the receiver, his voice cracking with a sharp, incredibly foreign and hysterical breakdown. "Dad, what the hell happened? Where are you? You have to fix this right now. Our house is completely locked down. Thick wood boards are nailed over the front windows. Some crazy construction company threw all our clothes in a pile of garbage on the street." I could hear the incredibly chaotic roar of passing traffic in the background, laced with Monica's incredibly sharp, incredibly piercing, and violent sobbing. She was audibly wailing, a continuous suffocating sound, a howl of pure, unadulterated material loss. "My bank accounts are all empty," Derek continued, his breathing turning into short, incredibly panicked gasps. "The joint emergency fund is completely cleared out. My personal debit card keeps getting declined. The cruise line humiliated us. They locked our cabin keys. Monica's parents just dumped us on the sidewalk and left. You have to call the bank immediately. You have to call the police. Someone stole our identity. Someone stole the house. Dad, you have to do something right now." He was practically hyperventilating, desperately clinging to that incredibly fragile hope that this was all just one massive, catastrophic mistake. He was still trying to play the traditional role of the concerned, innocently victimized son, counting on his wealthy father to instantly swoop in and financially rescue him. I took a slow breath, letting his incredibly frantic, incredibly pathetic ultimatum hang heavily in the digital connection between us. When I finally spoke, my voice was a smooth, incredibly cold whisper carrying absolute, uncompromising authority. "I don't have Alzheimer's, son," I declared, spitting out each syllable with incredibly sharp, surgical precision. "But I did have an incredibly profound, life-changing epiphany." The line plunged into dead silence, which felt absolutely perfect. The incredibly chaotic street noise in the background seemed to solidify completely. Even Monica's hysterical wailing stopped abruptly, suffocated by incredibly intense fear. The pure, undeniable weight of my words slammed into his chest. He suddenly realized that I knew everything. I knew absolutely everything. I didn't wait for him to concoct an incredibly pathetic, incredibly desperate lie. I methodically presented him with the full, incredibly inescapable reality of his new state of existence. "I sold the house, Derek," I continued, my tone completely devoid of any parental warmth or lingering pity. "2 days ago, I liquidated the entire Bellevue property to a corporate cash buyer. I authorized an absolutely unconditional, strictly as-is transaction. That means every piece of custom furniture, every designer bag, and that incredibly expensive set of golf clubs you love so much, legally belongs to the demolition team. I explicitly instructed them to treat your property just like the absolute garbage you have both proven yourselves to be." "Dad, please," Derek whimpered, his voice shrinking into an incredibly pathetic, incredibly broken whisper. "You can't do this to us. That house was given to us by you. It was ours. It was a revocable trust." "It was a trust that I permanently revoked," I corrected him smoothly. Revoked on the exact same day you decided to officially cancel our family cruise via a cowardly text message. And those bank accounts you are crying about right now, I drained them. I legally transferred every cent of the cash I earned through my hard labor into an incredibly secure, personal, independent account. You have absolutely nothing left, Derek. You are officially bankrupt, thoroughly homeless, and completely cut off from the massive wealth you arrogantly assumed you had the absolute right to steal. No, no, no. You can't just abandon us, Derek pleaded incredibly desperately, the sound of genuine, suffocating panic completely drowning out his previous words. We have nowhere to sleep tonight. We don't have the money for a basic hotel. We don't even have money for food. You have to help us. We're your family. You stopped being my family the exact moment you sat in that bedroom and actively conspired to lock me in a medical prison, I replied, my voice dropping to an incredibly dangerous, incredibly cold level. Did you really think you could legally declare me mentally incapacitated and seize my entire fortune? I paused, listening to his incredibly terrified breathing. Monica started screaming incredibly sharply in the background, begging me to forgive them. I ignored her completely and delivered the final, devastating blow. By the way, Mitchell already sent copies of your fraudulent incapacity petition and the signature of that corrupt doctor directly to the FBI, charging you with conspiracy to commit fraud against an elderly person. Derek let out an incredibly repressed, incredibly chilling sound. You are going to face incredibly long federal criminal prosecution, I added. I strongly suggest you use whatever pitiful change you have left to hire a criminal defense attorney. I hung up the phone, picked up my premium travel bag, and walked confidently toward my gate, ready to begin my brand new life.